Thinking about, should I do a local variable? Should I do an instant? And I can't believe how much of my time during a Ruby programming day thinking about local versus instance versus parameters. And I don't have a rubric that tells me the right thing to do. It's a little bit of a what is right for the situation that I'm in. But I saw this recently and it really made me think that, wow, if you have instance variables, like say you wanted to say, does this equal D? Yeah, no problem, false. But maybe you wanted it to blow up because that variable didn't exist. So you got to really think about when you're using instance variables. They have a little kind of catch there to using them. Sorry.
So you would want it not, you would want it, oh, it's not initialized, so it's nil, so it's not equal to D, and it gets false.
And it might be okay. It might be okay, but you got to think about it. That's the thing, Yeah. It gets you thinking. So when people hear about metaprogramming in Ruby, my experience has been that they sometimes kind of go like this on it. Oh my God, I can do everything through metaprogramming. And I kind of calm them down a little bit and say, that's great that you've got to that level, but now you've also got to a level where no one else is going to understand your code. And that could be one of the real drawbacks. Use few parameters. This is sort of an Uncle Bob thing, if folks know that. When I first read this, I fell off my chair because I programmed in a lot of old languages where, 8, 10, 12 parameters. You're going to use them all somewhere in the 1,000-line method you've got. When I read this, 1 is okay, 2 is a lot, and 0 is best. That's when I kind of fell off my chair a little bit. That was pretty shocking to me. But what's kind of interesting, I think that this is true, and I try to go by it now, is it also goes along with, for instance, short methods. If you only got like a 3 to 5 line method, you're probably not a lot of parameters you're going to be passing it, because it's probably not doing a lot of things. Whereas if you've got something that's like, 300 lines long, you're probably going to have to give it a lot of stuff for all of its decisions. So they kind of go together. A lot of these principles do actually go together. I also had someone recently who was like, oh, this thing had 8 parameters and I changed it to an object. And I was like, well, where did that get you? And I didn't look at his code, but I was wondering, does he unpack all of those 8 immediately after passing it? It's questionable about whether that's really giving you an advantage. One of the things that we'll do, though, it'll let you not have to change code in one place. You just pass this object. But it may be a trade-off for just using that code somewhere else. Linting and grading, do it. Allow a little duplication. So I heard this term over the last year, and it really spoke to me. A little duplication is worse than the wrong abstraction. Has anyone else heard of that?
I think you mean is better.
Yes. Good. Oh dear. A little duplication is better. I can't do that. It's very easy to go, you know things should be dry. So you see something in 2 spots and you just rush to create a method, dry it up, and then you found out that there's a third time where, and that may be okay. Agile development says, you only do what you need now, but I've certainly experienced in my coding where I just hold off. I know I'm probably going to do it, or I may want to do it, but I just hold off for a little while. The one that springs to mind right now, I was doing the other day was, I was doing all these instance variables, loading them up from like a config file. And I could feel myself doing something a lot, so I started to get that code smell kind of feeling of there's got to be a better way of doing this. And when I got to 18 instance variables that I was setting from reading this file, I said enough, it's time to stop. And I found out, I wondered if there was a way to set instance variables with metaprogramming, and there is. And so I was able to build a little loop. But I didn't do that just when I had 2, because it would have been like more code and really hard to understand. Personally, when I got to like a dozen or more, that's when I'm like, I gotta do something now. And I think of that as immersion design. Wait for your code to speak to you, and I'll touch on that in a second. Avoid extremes is fairly obvious. This is the dry analogy I make. You know, dry is good, but deserts are pretty hazardous to humans. And then I tried to find a really wet image. That was all I could come up with, so it's cute, right? Good code is easy to read and uses English. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because it just has to be. Is not optimized. That's one of the two problems. You know, computer science, premature optimization, and in
cache
today's
invalidation.
sorry.
The whole phrase end cache invalidation.
Oh, thank you, thank you. And then there's the third one as well, the one-off errors. The third one of the two. This is my bold statement. You know, very little code in 2019 needs to be highly performant, and usually not anticipate. Oh, I better do this because that'll be more performant. That'll be more efficient. Some of my programmers have told me. This is not a blanket statement, though. If you're working at Google and you're doing AdWords or any other really big company that's got millions of users, performance becomes absolutely critical. Okay, but not if you don't have that use case, then it's often not. Good code uses standards that evolve. Standards are good, but eventually they can kind of trap you a little bit. So as well as the technologies we do that evolve, I think standards themselves should evolve, but not in a haphazard way. Over a long time periods, new structures and needs will become apparent and be discussed. And that's as with all things that we do, that's the critical one. You don't just go off and have someone do it. It's a big discussion if it's a standard. Use the right. It's not about rules. Coding is about guidelines, right? And I consider quality code code that strikes a balance between the rules. It's not just code that follows all of the rules that you can put in a linter. There are decisions that humans still have to make in a lot of cases. Small classes and methods, I think everyone knows that is part of single responsibility. It just does one little thing. Who's heard of Sandy Metz? Cool. She's fairly well known in the Ruby community. She came out with a guideline of 5-line methods. First time I heard that, I fell off my seat with that one too. But if you try to go by it, even just for playing around, the design will start to change that you see emerging from your own code. 5-line methods and 100-line classes. That's a little bit arbitrary, you know.
I saw her give a talk where she sort of backed off from that a bit. It was guidelines for one specific project, where they were doing a massive refactoring job, and it was it was her way of saying, when do you know you're done? Well, when every line is that, if every method is down to 5 lines and every class and the class is down to 100 lines, your attention is probably better spent elsewhere.
Or elsewhere, right?
But as absolutes for every code base, she herself does not endorse it.
Yeah, and I certainly don't say that. I don't do it. So I won't say it to other people. For me, it's kind of I guess I'll throw out I need to be able to see it all. Is kind of my 5 lines. Which is like 20, 30 lines. Yes.
Is the 5 lines like the literally 5 lines part?
Yeah, it's like
is that supposed to be the inside of the method, or
yes,
including the
inside.
intro and
ignoring the def end?
Okay.
Yeah. Because 5 lines is basically enough to go if condition code else code end.
Cool.
That's 5 lines. Now some people take it to extremes and say, oh, you can get rid of conditionals and you can twist yourself in knots, I guess. But it's a good thing. I found it was a fun exercise to do. Not religiously, and I don't do it every time I'm coding today. I've got 20, 30 line methods and I'm comfortable with them. When I did it once, just for the exercise, I really started to understand SRP a lot better. I just want one thing going on. That's a really good thing. It's good practice. Small classes and methods is kind of a duh, though. Not the 5.
Could I ask you to amplify that? I've seen Smalltalk code where there are no if statements in it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like dumbfounded. I mean, there was something called double dispatch that people used. How do you get rid of if statement?
I don't know in this example, but what's in my mind is I just read that, and I just talked about earlier that chef example where there's that weird thing where you set a variable.
But that's just
You know, but I mean that was just one example for me of, oh, actually there's another way to do an if.
Yeah.
And I don't know how people who want to get rid of it, you know, in their methods do. But it's going too clever. Someone's got to maintain that thing, you know. Yeah. All right, value comments. Those precious dear comments, they're so rare, they're like diamonds, right? You don't have many of them, right? That's kind of the point I'm making. So I tried to think of some exceptions to avoid comments. By the way, just to be clear, like I used to write COBOL, so I'm like a comment master. But I don't try to avoid them these days. So here's some examples I came up with. Maybe the module support of something that you've included is going to end on this day. As soon as I came up with this, I started to say, well, I could have a little test or a little method that checks that date and gives a deprecation warning, or, you know, so I came up with something and I didn't really like it, so let me try another one. Dependent library, you know, whatever it is, randomly fails here. That's a bit more realistic. And there's 2 or 3 different areas where you might want to put a comment in because it's going to be hard for your code or even your tests to really express that. And dependent, you know, code from another area is one of them. And the other big one is if you have to be efficient, if efficiency is, you know, in the code that you're writing important, almost by definition, when you make something more efficient, you make it less readable. And it may not be obvious why you've done it, and usually, frequently will not be. So a comment then of why I've actually written it this way, you know, what problem I'm solving, I think that could be a good place. What do people think? Do people have other opinions on comments? It's a rich area.
I'll just like dive back to the whole like dynamic dispatch thing for a second.
Yeah.
One example you see a lot is like, so you have something that's handling like HTTP methods, right? And it's like get, put, post, patch, whatever. So if get do this, if post do that. That's kind of ugly, right? So one thing you could do is you could have like different constants in your class, and you could do like const get with the HTTP method and then call that as a function.
Right.
Or you could do like send, like handle underscore
right.
name of the HTTP method. So sometimes it's like kind of works. If the thing you're switching on is really more of like an enumerated thing. Not so much if it's a floating point or something like that. But I just want to throw that out there.
Nice. Robert.
There are situations where, you know, I mean, you look at the code, it's obvious what it's doing, but you know what it's doing is kind of weird and arbitrary, and there's no clear reason why. And at that point, you know, I mean, a comment along the lines of, you know, massaging for client system Y, which gags on this sort of thing.
Right.
Can save someone a whole lot of head scratching later.
Right.
I've actually found it saves me head scratching.
Oh yeah, the
in
future.
3 months, I have no idea.
Yeah, the
why
future.
I wrote that way.
You are the
Yeah,
future.
yeah,
You.
the
Yeah.
The person, you know, the person who's cursing at the code 6 months later could be you.
Could be you, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the other one I didn't kind of put here, it's kind of like the same dependency thing, is data. You might occasionally get some really weird piece of data which causes this condition. I didn't really put it out there because I'm trying to get more into you should control the data, you should set up all of your data, and that's how I like. But that's not always possible with some of the things you're testing.
The exceptions are kind of funny too, because if something's going to break on 12.1.19, like just burying it in a comment really doesn't solve the problem.
Who's ever going to see that?
I've seen people do clever stuff too, like actually have a test case. It's like,
Yeah.
look up the version of this library, and if it's greater than or
Fail.
whatever, fail the test.
Fail the test.
Yeah.
And I mean that testing tests is a thing I love to talk about as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's very whole levels of abstraction kind of thing. Like one of the things I talked about, I think last time, was when you do page objects, which are very popular in UI tests. you need to have, you should have, as they start to grow, tests for the tests. Do you have duplicates? Do you have orphans? You know? And I did get to the point where I wrote some code to test it, and then I thought about testing it. Okay.
Is code coverage an example of testing the tests? Sort of.
No, I don't think of that. I think of code coverage as just I've got classes and methods, and I want to know if I've got tests that cover them. But you could, I guess, the code that does that would then need to potentially be tested. It gets very recursive indeed.
Michael, can I ask you another?
Yes.
Is there any static or how do you test whether it's code is orphaned? I think of that as an incredibly hard problem.
For most of that kind of stuff, I use a tool that will tell me that.
Like what? How do you tell?
I think Code Climate will tell you about orphan code. I'm not totally sure. Do other folks use tools in the Ruby space that do that kind of stuff? Interesting.
I don't think you can do it with a tool.
Well, Ruby gets tough because if you've got any kind of dynamic or meta programming,
Exactly.
you're hosed.
Yeah.
So you can only do it if it's all static, which a lot of your code base will be. You know, you're writing the methods out. Yeah, good question. And there is an answer. I love those questions.
I'm happy.
Yeah.
I know that Josh Crane from Thoughtbot has gem, I think, called Unused. It's been run to run on the unused code.
That you can run over the static code?
Yes.
Or while it's running? Because while it's running, kind of makes sense.
No, not while it's running. Like you just like
Static.
yeah. So
Most code
it's-
is. Most code is static.
Yeah,
Unused.
Cool. That's cool. Well, that's something. What was it called again?
unused.
Unused. All right, there's a gem out there. Nice. All right, good code has less bugs. See previous 30 slides. Quality code is, this is the heart of what I'm trying to tell many organizations, in my opinion. It's voluntary activities and approaches that engineers use to create better quality code today. You can get your code working usually with it looking pretty crappy. And once you've got something written that works, even your pair may just sign off on it. So there's a lot of personal responsibility. It's on you. It's on you to write good code. And this is the thing that I've sort of referenced a couple of times. I think a quality code is about listening, not following a set of rules. It's about your code speaking to you. Well, I'm making too many changes every time I want to just do this one little thing, or I have to change 7 different files when this factor changes. So you listen to your code and listen to it shriek about what's most painful. Wow, it's quite a metaphor. I also think of quality code like tests because it's optional. It is up to each one of you. Quality code is level 2 thinking. You got to get your head out of the how am I going to code this method and say what problem am I trying to solve at some point. Recursion, linked lists, single, double, circular trees, binary tree searches, maps, design patterns. You notice I haven't talked about any of them today. They're all really important things to implement in your code base. But as you've seen today, there's a lot more to quality than algorithms for highly performant code. So when you're interviewing people, don't just interview them on algorithms, please.
You could almost put implementing any of those on your list of things not to do.
Yeah.
You,
Except for design.
use
patterns.
someone else's implementation.
Yeah. So I wrote a tree here, really.
So some companies are really going nuts on this. End rant. Okay, quality code is also more of a pleasure, less. Personally, you know, I like coding. I love coding. So when I get something to change, I just it's pleasurable to me. That's all I have. Thank you very much. And any other, I love the interaction. That's exactly what I love to have in these kind of scenarios. But there may be other thoughts, comments, questions, discussions, experience, advice that people have. I'd love to hear it.
Over-aggressive linters, like a Robocop, like it makes the code hyper dry if you're using it out of the box. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I've had some interesting experiences with that. I was gonna add that at one point. It's kind of the other way though, is where you're going. What I've seen is people take, we got to do linting, and they take Robocop, they run it, whoa, what's going on? All right, let's just deal with like line length and one other thing. And so they set it and they forget it. Sorry, I don't have a theme there. But that's what I've seen sometimes where people, and the other thing I've seen is where people use one Rubocop file for your whole code base. For instance, your tests as well as your app code. And those two code bases tend to look different. You know, like tests tend to have like long descriptions and some other characteristics about it that in code would be smells. So I think the one way you can get around that is you can have a Rubocop in subdirectories, so that you don't have to. Because what I've seen people do is just turn it off because something violates it. So that's a really brute force approach. So I think if you do the subdirectory Rubocops, that helps with that. Yes.
The other thing I've seen is you take the best programmer, that everyone likes, and Rubocop allows you to generate the config file off of a set of files. You generate that, and then people are moved into the direction of the best programmer.
I've never used that. That's interesting.
And it's kind of cool.
That's really interesting. I'm like immediately wondering, like, what if it finds like two things how does it decide if it's not perfect code? That's interesting.
I think it will run. You could say analyze this, and it has your Rubocop has its defaults. The line length should be
so it'll go against its like database.
It'll look through your code and say, oh, your longest line is 152, so we're gonna say line length cannot be more than 152.
Gotcha.
And as you slowly, so Rubocop will pass on your code base as is.
Right.
You just slowly bring things back. Like, okay, now my longest line is 120. Okay, we can bring that.
And again, that points to not a one-time effort of creating this file, but actually it's a quality initiative that's good programmers have got to keep in their mind. A couple of weeks have gone by, everything's looking good. Let's tighten it up a little bit more. Definitely. Yeah, no, good points. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go on. We'll get to him as well.
I was just wondering your feelings about the law of Demeter.
Does everyone know what that is, the law of Demeter? It's a simple way to put it. Speak it out, don't throw it out.
Only talk to your friends.
Yeah, that's a good way. Don't have too many dots. Right, don't have chains of this thing, dot this thing, dot this thing, dot this thing. And what was the question? What's my opinion?
Well, we had a lecture 2 times ago where we were showing how, his name's John from ThoughtBot, who was explaining, to do functional programming in Ruby, you ignore the law of Demeter and you do blah.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, I use Emacs as a refactoring tool to refactor, to extract methods from blah, blah, blah. So the law of Demeter was introduced in order to allow things like that to happen. But I don't know if people do that kind of thing here in the Ruby community. So what's a good approach for looking at the law of Demeter? Do you adhere? Do you not adhere?
I don't have strong. Does anyone else have strong? I don't have strong opinions on that. I mean, it's fairly obvious if you've got a long chain. It's an obvious problem. Anything can break in it. You've created something kind of fragile, whereas one thing is not going to have that problem. It's so situational, though. I think I find it. Yeah, I don't know. Have it in mind, I guess. I tend to find myself not chaining things together because I know it's bad, and so I will create separate objects and do that. Yeah, that's not really an answer though.
Now the law came into existence explicitly for refactoring.
Right.
So if you're not refactoring, then what's the good thing about observing the law? I mean, you sort of said, but I just if something's going to fail,
what's the alternative? That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. If you don't have
functional programming applied to Ruby.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because you're twisting your head. I've got into functional programming recently, but I realized that like doing it through Ruby is, I don't know, it's doing something different with Ruby than what I expect to do with Ruby. Yeah. I wonder if I should just go and use a functional programming paradigm, just go with it. Cool.
But it speaks to your, oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes.
Flog and flay are also useful tools for identifying large areas of code smeller.
What's it called?
Flog.
Flog.
Flay.
Yes, play. I forgot about those. Use them in a while.
Ruby Critic, uses, that and 3 others. You tried that.
What is it?
The gem Ruby Critic,
Ruby Critic.
yeah,
They're all coming out. I thought there were new tools. They're all coming out now. That's cool.
oh, it just calls flog and flay.
Oh, okay, right.
Just a bunch of those.
Right. Nice.
Which is the one that changes your tests.
Change
So
your
it's like,
tests.
you might have written your test, happy path, and it will say, if sum of 2 and 3 is 4. Okay, well then it will say, well, sum of j and 2, and you should get an error. Oh, did you cover that error with your test or with your code? There's some, it will
I
mutate your
remember seeing
tests
that, I know.
to try and fail your tests because
Yeah, I'm in this area, so I'm fascinated by that.
I'll have to find the name of it. I don't
Yeah,
know.
can you post
Yeah,
that?
I can find
That's
that.
interesting. That's really interesting.
I'll look for it. I'll post it.
Automate your automation. Wow, it's getting recursive immediately. Cool. Any other thoughts, comments? All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
All right.
Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. That was great. Thanks for coming.